Sometimes the deepest loneliness comes from living too long with only memories for company. We've all felt the ache of losing someone we can never replace. In an old castle deep in dark woods, a vampire has wandered alone for centuries. One night, a servant woman arrives to clean the empty halls. She's 40 years old with tired hands and a strong heart. When he sees her, something stirs in his cold chest. She looks like the woman he loved long ago. She speaks to him with kindness, not fear. They sit by the fire and share their sorrows. Will her gentle spirit help him remember what it means to be human again? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Carpathian Mountains had stood witness to countless storms, but none quite like the one that brought Marta Ivanov to Castle Dracul on that October evening in 1847. Rain lashed against the ancient stone walls with the fury of heaven itself, and lightning illuminated the towering spires that had once commanded respect across 3 kingdoms. Now they stood as monuments to forgotten glory, their banners long since rotted away, their courtyards choked with weeds that grew through cracked cobblestones. Marta pulled her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders as the carriage wheels ground to a halt before the massive oak doors. The driver, a weathered man named Pavel, who had spoken little during their journey from the village, refused to meet her eyes as he handed down her single travelling chest. His hands trembled, whether from cold or fear she could not say. "This is as far as I go, mistress," Pavel muttered, crossing himself. "The village elders paid me to bring you here, nothing more." "I understand," Marta replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. At 40 years of age, she had learned to face uncertainty with quiet dignity. The lines around her brown eyes spoke of hardships weathered and sorrows borne, but they had not dimmed the kindness that had always been her greatest strength. The carriage disappeared into the storm before she had taken 3 steps toward the entrance. Marta stood alone in the courtyard, rain soaking through her modest dress, and studied the imposing structure that would be her new home. The castle rose like a sleeping giant against the stormy sky, its windows dark, save for a single flickering light in what appeared to be the highest tower. Gothic arches framed doorways that had once welcomed kings and ambassadors. Now they seemed to yawn open like mouths hungry for souls. Yet Marta felt no fear. She had known too much genuine hardship to be frightened by mere atmosphere. Her husband had died of consumption 3 winters past, leaving her with debts that consumed their small farm. Her only son had perished the year before that, taken by the same plague that swept through their village like the angel of death. She had buried them both with her own hands in the frozen earth behind their cottage. After such losses, what terror could an empty castle hold? The village elders had approached her just as the last of her possessions were being sold to pay creditors. They spoke in hushed tones about the mysterious lord of Castle Dracul, a reclusive nobleman who required domestic service after decades of isolation. The pay they offered was more than generous enough to secure a small cottage somewhere far from these mountains when her service ended. More importantly, it offered purpose when she had begun to wonder if God had any use left for her in this world. "He keeps strange hours," Elder Vasily had warned, his ancient eyes troubled. "You may not see him for days at a time, but the castle must be maintained, the fires kept burning, the rooms cleaned and aired. Can you manage such work alone?" Marta had assured them she could. She had been keeping house since she was 12 years old. First for her parents, then her husband, and finally in solitude after they had all departed this earthly realm. Work had become her prayer, her meditation, her means of staying connected to the living world when grief threatened to drag her into darkness. The great doors opened at her approach, though she had not knocked. They swung inward on hinges that groaned like old bones, revealing a vast entrance hall lit by candles that flickered in iron sconces along the stone walls. The floor was marble, inlaid with intricate patterns that spoke of Italian craftsmen and unlimited wealth. Tapestries hung from the walls, their colors faded, but their artistry still magnificent. They depicted scenes of medieval life, knights departing for crusades, ladies waiting in gardens, harvests celebrated in village squares. "Welcome, Marta Ivanov." The voice came from the shadows near the great staircase, rich and cultured, tinged with an accent she could not quite place. A figure emerged from the darkness, moving with the fluid grace of nobility born rather than learned. He was tall and lean, dressed in black clothing that might have been fashionable a century past. His dark hair was swept back from a face that could have belonged to a man of 30, though something in his pale eyes suggested he had seen far more than 3 decades could contain. "I am Lord Alexandru," he continued, offering a formal bow that belonged to a more courteous age. "I trust your journey was not too arduous, despite the storm." "The weather was harsh, my lord, but I have weathered worse," Marta replied, curtsying as deeply as her aching knees would allow. "I am grateful for this opportunity to serve your household." Something flickered across Alexandru's features, surprise perhaps or recognition. He studied her face with an intensity that might have troubled a younger woman, but Marta had long since ceased to worry about men's attentions. She met his gaze calmly, noting the unusual pallor of his skin, and the way the candlelight seemed to gather in his eyes like pools of dark water. "You are not what I expected," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "The years have changed things. I am perhaps older than the usual servant, my lord, but I assure you, my experience more than compensates for any lack of youth." Alexandru's smile was both sad and mysterious. "Age brings wisdom, does it not? And wisdom is a rarer treasure than beauty." He gestured toward the corridor that led deeper into the castle. "Come, let me show you to your quarters. The castle is vast, but most rooms have been sealed for many years. You will need tend only those spaces that remain in use." As they walked through halls lined with portraits of long-dead nobles, Marta noticed details that spoke of a household long without proper care. Dust lay thick on surfaces that should have gleamed, and cobwebs decorated corners like tattered lace. Yet the bones of grandeur remained visible beneath the neglect. This had once been a place of power and culture, where music echoed through ballrooms and scholars debated in libraries filled with rare manuscripts. "How long has the castle been without regular staff, my lord?" she asked, running her finger along a windowsill and noting the accumulation of grime. "Longer than you might imagine," Alexandru replied. "I have become particular in my habits. I prefer solitude to the complications of a full household. You are the first to walk these halls in quite some time." They climbed a narrow staircase to the servants' quarters in the east wing. Marta's room was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a wooden chest for her belongings, and a window that overlooked the castle's kitchen gardens. Someone had laid a fire in the small hearth and left bread, cheese, and wine on the table. The gesture spoke of consideration rare in masters toward their servants. "I take my meals irregularly," Alexandru explained, lingering in the doorway. "Often I'm away from the castle for days at a time. You need not concern yourself with cooking for me, though you must certainly prepare what you need for yourself. The kitchens are well stocked, and you have free use of anything you require." "Thank you, my lord. When would you prefer I begin my duties?" "Tomorrow evening will be sufficient. Rest tonight, and tomorrow you may explore the castle to familiarize yourself with its layout. I ask only that you avoid the tower rooms and the lower crypts. Those areas are unsafe." After Alexandru departed, Marta unpacked her few possessions and arranged them in the chest. A spare dress, her late husband's prayer book, a small wooden cross her son had carved for her last Christmas. These humble items represented the sum of her earthly goods. Yet as she settled into the comfortable chair by the fire and broke bread in her new home, she felt something she had not experienced in many months: the possibility of peace. The storm continued to rage outside her window, but within the thick stone walls of Castle Drackle all was warmth and quietude. She offered prayers of thanksgiving for safe arrival and whatever providence had guided her to this place. Tomorrow she would begin the work of bringing order to chaos, light to darkness, care to neglect. Tonight, for the first time since her son's death, she would sleep without the weight of uncertainty pressing down upon her chest. Yet, as she prepared for bed, Marta found herself thinking of her mysterious employer. There had been something familiar about Lord Alexandru, though she was certain they had never met. Perhaps it was simply that his courtesy reminded her of her late husband, who had also possessed the old-fashioned manners of a more genteel age. Or perhaps it was the sadness she had glimpsed in his eyes, a sorrow that echoed her own understanding of loss. Whatever the reason, she felt no unease about serving in his household. He had treated her with respect and consideration, addressing her as a person rather than a mere convenience. After the humiliations of poverty and debt, such dignity was a gift she had not expected to receive again. The last thing Marta saw before sleep claimed her was the silver locket that lay on the table beside her bed, partially hidden beneath a stack of letters tied with faded ribbon. She had noticed Lord Alexandru touch his chest frequently during their conversation, as though checking that something precious remained safe against his heart. Everyone carried such treasures. She knew physical reminders of loves that death could not diminish. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and fresh opportunities to serve. Tonight, the storm would pass, and morning would dawn on the beginning of what she hoped might prove to be a second chance at purpose in a world that had seemed to have forgotten her entirely. 3 days had passed since Marta's arrival at Castle Drackle, and she had settled into a rhythm of solitary work that brought her unexpected satisfaction. The vast halls echoed with the sounds of her labor, the whisper of dust cloths across ancient furniture, the splash of water in buckets as she scrubbed floors, the crackle of fires she built in long, cold hearths. Each room she restored seemed to breathe again, as though awakening from a deep slumber. Lord Alexandru remained largely absent during daylight hours, appearing only in the evenings to inquire politely about her needs or to ensure she had everything required for her comfort. Their conversations were brief and formal, yet Marta sensed a loneliness in him that matched her own. He moved through his ancestral home like a ghost, haunting familiar spaces, touching objects with reverence born of memory rather than present joy. On the third night, as midnight approached and the castle settled into its customary silence, Marta discovered she had forgotten to bank the fire in the great hall. The autumn air had grown sharp, and she knew the chill would make her morning duties unpleasant. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, she took a candle and made her way through the darkened corridors toward the main hearth. The great hall lay in shadow, illuminated only by the dying embers that cast dancing patterns on the stone walls. As Marta knelt before the fireplace and began arranging fresh logs, she became aware of a presence behind her. The awareness came not from sound, her visitor moved with absolute silence, but from the sudden tension that filled the air like the moments before lightning strikes. "You should not be wandering the castle at this hour." The voice was Alexandru's, yet changed somehow. Deeper, rougher, carrying an undertone that made the hair on Marta's arms rise despite the warmth from the rekindled fire. She turned slowly, still kneeling, and found him standing 10 feet away in the shadows beyond the firelight's reach. Even in the dim illumination, she could see that something fundamental had altered in her employer's appearance. His skin seemed paler than marble, and his dark eyes reflected the firelight like those of a nocturnal animal. When he smiled a sad, apologetic expression, she glimpsed teeth that were longer and sharper than any human mouth should contain. "My lord," she said quietly, rising to her feet with the same calm dignity she would have shown had she encountered him in broad daylight. "I apologize for disturbing your evening. I meant only to tend the fire." Alexandru stared at her, his inhuman features registering surprise that bordered on shock. "You are not afraid." "Should I be?" Most would be. He stepped closer, moving with that fluid grace she had noticed before, though now it seemed less like nobility and more like the predatory elegance of a hunting cat. "Do you understand what you are seeing, Marta Ivanov?" She studied his transformed face, the pallor that spoke of bloodlessness, the elongated canine teeth, the eyes that held depths no mortal gaze could contain. Her mind, practical and grounded in the realities of rural life, processed the evidence with surprising acceptance. She had heard the old stories, of course. Every village in the Carpathians carried such tales, passed down through generations like warnings wrapped in folklore. "I believe I do," she replied, her voice steady, "though I confess it explains much about your unusual habits and the villagers' reluctance to speak of this place. And yet you remain standing there, unafraid, as though we were discussing the weather." Alexandru's voice carried wonderment. "Why?" Marta considered the question seriously before answering. "Perhaps because fear serves no purpose when one has already lost everything worth protecting. Or perhaps because I have known enough genuine monsters, men who beat their wives, who cheat widows of their inheritance, who take pleasure in others' suffering, to recognize that you are not one of them." "I am precisely that," Alexandru said, though his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as her. "I am a creature of darkness, sustained by blood, cursed to walk this earth while all I once loved crumbles to dust. I have taken life to preserve my own existence. What greater monster could there be? A monster who felt no shame for his nature." Marta moved closer, noting how the firelight seemed to warm his cold features. "A monster who would not warn an innocent woman to avoid him. You speak of your curse as though it torments you. That suggests the man you once were still lives within whatever you have become." She reached toward the mantelpiece and retrieved a torn fragment of canvas that had fallen from one of the portraits hanging above. The piece showed part of a woman's face, soft brown eyes and gentle features rendered with obvious love and skill. Alexandru's eyes fixed on the fragment with an expression of such profound loss that Marta's heart clenched in sympathy. "She was beautiful," Marta said softly. "Your wife? My beloved." The words seemed dragged from the depths of his being. "Elena. She died of plague 4 centuries ago. He stopped, his jaw working as though the next words were too difficult to voice. "I made a bargain to bring her back. Instead, I condemned myself to an existence without her, watching as everything we built together fell to ruin." "And in all those centuries, you have found no peace?" Alexandru laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Peace. I am hunger given form, darkness incarnate. I have walked through kingdoms and watched them fall. I have seen plague and war consume entire peoples. I have fed on innocence to sustain my cursed existence. What peace could such a creature ever know?" Marta set the portrait fragment carefully on the mantel and turned back to face him. In the firelight, his inhuman features seemed less terrifying than tragic, the face of a man trapped in a nightmare of his own making. "Have you fed recently, my lord?" The question should have been absurd, even dangerous. Instead, Alexandru answered with painful honesty. "Not for many weeks. I can sustain myself for months at a time, though the hunger grows unbearable. I had planned to travel to distant villages when you arrived, but your presence has—" He paused, studying her face with renewed intensity. "You remind me of her. Elena. Not just your appearance, though there are similarities. Something deeper. The way you speak, your kindness toward a creature that should inspire only revulsion." "Perhaps," Marta said carefully, "that is why Providence brought me here. Not to serve your household, but to help you remember what you once were, what you might become again. Impossible. The curse cannot be broken. I have searched for 4 centuries, for a cure imposed from without." Marta interrupted gently. "But what if redemption comes from within? What if the very guilt and sorrow you carry are signs that your humanity still exists, merely buried beneath the weight of centuries? Alexandru stared at her, as though she had spoken in a foreign tongue. You would help a monster? Risk your life for a creature already damned? I would help a man who has suffered alone for far too long. Marta's voice carried the quiet conviction of someone who had found unexpected purpose. I have known loss, my lord. I have buried husband and child, watched everything familiar crumble away. But I have learned that sometimes healing comes not through forgetting our pain, but through sharing it with another who understands. And if I lose control, if the hunger overcomes whatever humanity you believe remains. Marta smiled, and for the first time since arriving at the castle, the expression reached her eyes. Then I will face that trial when it comes. But tonight, I choose to see not the monster you fear yourself to be, but the man who warns me of danger, who ensures my comfort, who grieves for a love lost centuries ago. That man deserves whatever help I can offer. Alexandru stood motionless for long moments, his inhuman features shifting between hope and despair. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I had forgotten what kindness sounds like when offered freely, without fear or expectation of reward. Then let us help you remember, Marta said simply. Let us see if 4 centuries of darkness might finally give way to dawn. The fire crackled in the silence that followed, casting warm light on 2 souls who had each found, in the most unlikely of circumstances, exactly what they had ceased to believe they might ever find again: hope. In the days following their midnight encounter, an unusual routine established itself within the walls of Castle Dracul. Alexandru maintained his nocturnal habits, retiring to his chambers before dawn and remaining absent during the daylight hours. Yet his presence seemed to permeate every corner of the ancient fortress, from the careful arrangement of fresh flowers that appeared each morning to the way certain rooms grew warmer despite their northern exposure. Marta found herself attuned to the subtle signs of his attention. A book of poetry left open to verses about redemption, a warm cloak hanging in her chamber on particularly cold mornings, the mysterious appearance of delicacies in the kitchen, fruits and cheeses that could not have come from the castle's neglected stores. He watched over her welfare from the shadows, she realized, like a guardian angel who believed himself to be a fallen one. Their direct interactions remained carefully measured. Alexandru would emerge from his solitude near sunset, appearing in whichever room she happened to be cleaning, with the silent grace that had initially startled her. Now she found comfort in his presence, though she noticed how he maintained a careful distance, positioning himself where candlelight would not fully reveal his features. "You need not lurk in the shadows, my lord," she said one evening as she polished the silver in the dining hall. He had been watching her work for nearly an hour from the doorway, and she could sense his internal struggle between the desire for companionship and fear of his own nature. "I prefer the darkness," Alexandru replied, though his tone suggested the preference was born of necessity rather than choice. "The light reveals too much of what I have become. Perhaps it also reveals what you still are." Marta set down the candlestick she had been cleaning and turned to face him directly. "Will you not join me at the table?" "I was about to take my evening meal. I do not eat food, Marta. Surely you understand. I understand that you do not require food for sustenance. That does not mean you cannot find pleasure in companionship during a meal." She gestured to the chair across from her place setting. "I have been taking my meals in solitude for over a year. I confess I miss the simple comfort of sharing a table with another person." After a moment's hesitation, Alexandru moved from the doorway and took the offered seat. In the warm glow of the dining room's candles, his inhuman features seemed less pronounced, more like those of a pale nobleman recovering from a long illness. Marta served herself bread and soup from the tureen, while Alexandru sat with his hands folded, watching her movements with the fascination of someone observing a half-remembered ritual. Tell me about your life before, she said between spoonfuls of soup. Before the curse. What brought you joy in those days? Alexandru's fingers drummed against the table's polished surface. That was so long ago. Sometimes I wonder if those memories belong to someone else entirely. Memories fade if we do not tend them like gardens, Marta observed. But they can be cultivated back to life with proper care. What is the first thing you remember feeling truly happy about? A smile ghost across Alexandru's lips, the first genuine expression of pleasure she had seen from him. Music, he said after a pause. I loved music above all things. My mother played the harpsichord, and she taught me to read notation before I learned my letters. I composed pieces for special occasions, my sister's wedding, harvest celebrations, Christmas Eve. Do you still compose? How could I? What joy could a creature of darkness find in creating beauty? Marta considered this while breaking her bread into careful pieces. The wooden cross her son had carved hung from a chain around her neck, catching the candlelight as she moved. She noticed Alexandru's eyes fix upon it, not with the revulsion folklore would suggest, but with something approaching longing. My late husband was a blacksmith, she said conversationally. Strong hands, broad shoulders, everything a woman might want in a protector. But what I loved most about him was the way he hummed while he worked. Simple melodies, nothing elaborate, but they filled our cottage with warmth. After he died, the silence seemed to press against my ears until I thought I might go mad from it. And how did you bear it? I began humming his songs myself. Badly at first, I have never possessed a fine voice. But slowly, the music returned to my life. Not the same as before, but something new built upon the foundation of what I had lost. Alexandru leaned forward slightly, drawn into her story despite himself. You believe I might find my way back to music? I believe you might find your way back to many things you have convinced yourself are beyond your reach. Marta finished her soup and reached for the fruit that had mysteriously appeared in the bowl grapes, so perfect. They might have been grown in paradise itself. Where do these come from? The village market closed weeks ago, and winter approaches. A flush of something that might have been embarrassment crossed Alexandru's pale features. I travel at night. There are sources available to my kind, merchants who cater to unusual clientele. You acquire these luxuries for me? You deserve better fare than the preserved meat and root vegetables stored in the castle's cellars. A woman of your refinement should not subsist on peasant food. The observation revealed more about Alexandru's character than perhaps he intended. Despite centuries of isolation, he retained the instincts of a nobleman trained to care for those under his protection. More significantly, he saw her not as a mere servant, but as someone worthy of consideration and courtesy. Your thoughtfulness touches me, she said simply. It has been many months since anyone concerned themselves with my comfort. I have had little practice in such matters. The last person I cared for died when Europe's maps looked entirely different than they do today. Then we shall both learn together, you to care, and I to accept caring. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of wind howling through the castle's upper reaches, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. Alexandru rose abruptly, his head tilted as though listening for something beyond normal human hearing. The villagers are talking, he said, his voice carrying new tension. They wonder about your welfare. Some speak of mounting a rescue expedition. Let them wonder. I am here by choice, and I will remain by choice. You do not understand the danger. If they come here in force, if they see me, they will see a nobleman who has offered shelter and employment to a widow in need. Marta's voice carried quiet conviction. Unless you give them reason to think otherwise. Alexandru stared at her, his inhuman features reflecting surprise and something deeper gratitude mixed with disbelief. You would defend me to them? I would defend the truth, and the truth is that you have shown me nothing but kindness and respect." She rose from the table and began gathering the dishes. "Now, if you will, excuse me. I must prepare these rooms for tomorrow. The silver will not polish itself, and I suspect you have your own evening activities to attend to." As she moved about her tasks, Marta was acutely aware of Alexandru's continued presence. He remained seated at the table, watching her work with an expression of wonder, as though witnessing some miracle he had long ago ceased to believe possible. For the first time in centuries, it seemed, he was not alone, with only his guilt and hunger for company. The following evening brought with it a discovery that would change everything between them. While cleaning Alexandru's private study, a sanctuary he had finally granted her permission to enter, Marta uncovered a collection of letters tied with a faded crimson ribbon. They had been carefully preserved in a cedar box, the parchment still supple despite its obvious age, the ink still dark against pages that should have crumbled to dust centuries ago. She had not intended to pry, but when one of the letters slipped from the loosened ribbon and fell open on the desk, the flowing script caught her eye. The language was an archaic form of Romanian, but she could make out enough words to understand that these were love letters written in a woman's delicate hand. "My dearest Alexandru," the visible passage read, "each day without you feels like winter in my heart. I count the hours until your return from the capital, when spring will come again to our little world. Those are not for your eyes." Alexandru's voice came from directly behind her, soft, but carrying an undertone that raised the hair on her arms. She had not heard him approach, yet when she turned, he stood close enough that she could see the pain etched in every line of his pale features. "Forgive me, my lord. The letter fell open when I moved the box to dust beneath it. I did not mean to intrude upon your private correspondence." Elena's letters. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I have read them so many times that I could recite each word from memory, yet I cannot bring myself to stop." They are all that remains of her voice. Marta carefully gathered the scattered papers, noting the way Alexandru's hands trembled slightly as she restored them to their proper order. Would you like me to read one aloud? Sometimes hearing beloved words in another's voice can bring comfort rather than pain." Alexandru stared at her as though she had suggested something both wonderful and terrible. "You would do that? Speak her words. Only if you believe it would bring you peace rather than torment." After a long moment, Alexandru selected a letter from the collection and handed it to her with the reverence one might show a holy relic. "This one. She wrote it during the summer before everything changed." Marta settled into the chair beside the fireplace and unfolded the delicate parchment. In the warm candlelight, she began to read in her clear, gentle voice. "My beloved Alexandru, today I walked in the garden we planted together, and the roses have grown so tall they now climb to my chamber window. I can smell their sweetness each morning when I wake, and it reminds me of the day you first told me you loved me, standing among those very bushes with dirt on your hands and hope in your eyes. The village children came to help with the harvest, and their laughter filled our courtyard like music. I find myself imagining the sound our own children's voices might make, echoing through these halls. Do you think they would have your dark eyes or my stubborn chin? Would they inherit your love of music or my terrible habit of speaking before thinking?" As Marta read, she watched Alexandru's face transform. The hardness that centuries of isolation had carved into his features seemed to soften, revealing glimpses of the man he had once been, young, hopeful, deeply in love. Tears gathered in his inhuman eyes, though whether from joy or sorrow, she could not say. "She dreamed of children," he whispered when Marta paused. "We had planned so much together. A nursery in the eastern tower, close to the morning sun. Music lessons in the conservatory, teaching them to ride in the meadows below the castle. And what happened to those dreams?" Alexandru rose and moved to the window, staring out at the dark mountains that had witnessed his transformation. The plague came to the village in late autumn. Elena insisted on helping tend the sick, despite my fears for her safety. She had such a generous heart, she could not bear to remain safe in the castle while others suffered. She fell ill 3 days before our wedding. I watched her fade, helpless to prevent it, and when she died, his voice broke. I could not accept it. There were stories, old legends about ways to cheat death. I sought out a witch in the deepest part of the forest, a creature older than memory. She offered me a bargain. Marta set the letter aside and joined him at the window. In the reflection of the glass, she could see both their faces, his marked by supernatural pallor, hers lined with mortality and compassion. What did you trade for the chance to bring her back? Everything. My humanity, my soul, my place in God's creation. The witch promised Elena would return to me, that death would never again part us. Instead, I woke 3 days later as you see me now, and Elena was gone forever. Not even her grave remained. It was as though she had never existed at all, except in my memories and these letters. The witch deceived you. She gave me exactly what I asked, for eternal life. She simply neglected to mention that eternity without love is not life at all, but the cruelest form of death. Alexandru's reflection met Marta's eyes in the window glass. For 4 centuries I have existed in this state, neither truly alive nor properly dead, sustained only by guilt and the fading hope that somehow I might find redemption. Marta turned from the window to face him directly. And in all that time, you have never felt the touch of genuine human companionship? How could I? What woman would willingly associate with a creature such as I have become? This woman. Marta's voice carried quiet conviction. This woman who has listened to your story and sees not a monster, but a man who loved so deeply that he was willing to damn himself for the chance to save another. That is not evil, Alexandru. Misguided, perhaps. Tragic, certainly, but not evil. Alexandru stared at her with wonder and disbelief, warring in his expression. You would stay here, knowing what I am, knowing the hunger that drives me? I would stay here because of what you are, a soul in need of healing, just as I have been. Marta reached out and gently touched his cold hand. To her amazement, she felt warmth beneath her fingers, as though her touch alone could kindle some spark of life in his cursed form. Perhaps that is why we have found each other, Alexandru. Not by chance, but by design. 2 broken spirits given the opportunity to help each other find wholeness again. For the first time since his transformation, Alexandru dared to hope that the darkness might not be eternal after all. As the days grew shorter and winter tightened its grip on the Carpathian Mountains, the relationship between Marta and Alexandru deepened in ways neither had anticipated. Their evening conversations had become the cornerstone of both their days. She looked forward to them with an eagerness that surprised her, while he emerged from his daytime solitude with less reluctance and more genuine anticipation. It was during one of these twilight encounters that Marta made a discovery that would illuminate another piece of Alexandru's lost humanity. While dusting the music room, a chamber that had remained locked until recently, she found an ornate music box crafted from rosewood and inlaid with mother-of-pearl. When she lifted the delicate lid, a melody began to play, sweet and haunting, unlike anything she had ever heard. Alexandru appeared in the doorway as though summoned by the music itself, his face transformed by an expression of such profound longing that Marta's heart clenched in response. He moved toward the music box like a man in a trance, his fingers hovering above the intricate mechanism as the melody continued its plaintive song. I composed this piece for Elena, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. It was to be played during our wedding ceremony, when she walked down the aisle of the village church. I had it crafted by the finest artisan in Vienna as a wedding gift. It's beautiful, Marta said softly, noting how the music seemed to fill the dusty chamber with warmth and life. The melody speaks of love so pure it could move angels to weep. She never heard it completed. The plague took her before I could present it to her. Alexandru's fingers finally touched the music box, and the melody grew richer, as though responding to its creator's presence. I have not been able to bear the sound of it since her death. Yet hearing it now, with you here, it brings comfort rather than pain. It brings memory without the usual sting of loss. How is that possible? Marta studied his face in the candlelight, noting changes that had occurred gradually over their weeks together. His skin, while still pale, no longer possessed the marble cold appearance of the truly dead. His movements, though still graceful beyond mortal capability, had lost some of their predatory edge. Most remarkably, she had begun to see him cast shadows, faint ones, but shadows nonetheless. "Perhaps it is because you are no longer listening alone," she suggested. "Grief shared becomes more bearable, just as joy shared becomes more complete." Alexandru closed the music box, though his hands lingered on its surface. "You have given me something I believed lost forever, Marta. Not just companionship, but—" He paused, searching for words. "Hope. For the first time in 4 centuries, I wake each evening not to endure another night, but to anticipate what we might discover together." Their peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats in the courtyard below. Alexandru tensed immediately, his head tilting as he listened with supernatural acuity to sounds beyond normal human perception. "3 riders," he said grimly, "armed, from the village. They carried torches and silver crosses." Marta moved to the window and peered down at the courtyard, where 3 men on horseback were dismounting. She recognized Elder Vasily among them, along with the village priest and a younger man she did not know. Their faces were grim with determination and fear in equal measure. "They have come for me," Marta said with quiet certainty. "The villagers grow concerned about my welfare. I should have sent word of my continued well-being. You must go with them," Alexandru said immediately, though the words seemed to cause him physical pain. "I cannot, I will not be responsible for turning their suspicions into outright hostility toward you. I will not abandon you to face their fears alone. Marta, you do not understand. If they see me, truly see me as I am, they will not rest until they have destroyed me. And you would be branded as my accomplice, perhaps even accused of practicing dark arts. Your reputation, your safety, everything would be forfeit." The pounding on the great doors below echoed through the castle like thunder. Elder Vasily's voice carried clearly through the night air. "Marta Ivanov, we know you are within. Show yourself and prove that no harm has befallen you." Alexandru moved toward the shadows at the edge of the room, preparing to vanish, as was his habit when danger threatened. But Marta caught his arm, surprising them both with the gesture. Where her fingers touched his skin, she felt unmistakable. Warmth, the heat of flowing blood and beating heart. "You are changing," she whispered, wonder in her voice. "Whatever you have become over these centuries, it is not permanent. I can feel life returning to you. That is impossible. The curse cannot be. The curse was born of despair and isolation." Marta interrupted, her voice gaining strength as understanding dawned. "Perhaps it can be weakened by hope and connection. Perhaps my presence here serves a greater purpose than either of us realized." The pounding at the doors grew more insistent, accompanied now by shouts demanding her immediate appearance. Alexandru's features shifted between hope and terror as he grappled with possibilities he had long since dismissed as impossible. "If there is truth in what you suggest," he said slowly, "then your safety becomes even more paramount. I cannot allow harm to come to the one person who might—" He stopped, unable to voice the full scope of what she might represent to him. "Then trust me to handle this," Marta said firmly. "I will go to them, assure them of my welfare, and explain that I serve a reclusive nobleman who values his privacy. There is no need for them to see you or to know the true nature of your condition. And if they demand you return with them immediately, then I will explain that my employment here brings me satisfaction and security I had not known since my husband's death. I will make them understand that I choose to remain." Alexandru stared at her with an expression that blended gratitude, terror, and something deeper, something that looked remarkably like the love he had once felt for another woman in another lifetime. "You would defy the entire village for my sake?" "I would defend the truth for both our sakes," Marta corrected. "The truth is that you have shown me nothing but kindness and respect. The truth is that my life has found new purpose within these walls. The truth is that I believe you deserve the chance to reclaim your humanity, regardless of how long that journey might take." As the voices below grew more demanding, Marta straightened her shoulders and prepared to face whatever challenges awaited. For the first time since arriving at Castle Dracul, she understood fully why Providence had brought her to this place, not merely to serve, but to save, and perhaps, in saving him, to save herself as well. Marta descended to the great hall with measured steps, her spine straight and her manner composed despite the gravity of the situation. She had faced angry creditors, grieving neighbors, and officious church wardens throughout her life. 3 concerned villagers would not intimidate her now, regardless of their suspicions about her mysterious employer. When she opened the massive doors, Elder Vasile stood flanked by Father Dimitriu and a burly man she recognized as the village blacksmith, Petru. All 3 held torches that cast dancing shadows across their weathered faces, and she could see the silver crosses hanging prominently from their necks. They had come prepared for supernatural confrontation, yet their expressions softened with relief upon seeing her unharmed. "Marta Ivanov," Elder Vasil said gravely, "we have come to inquire about your welfare. It has been over a month since you departed the village, and no word has reached us of your circumstances." "I am well, Elder, as you can see," Marta replied with calm dignity. "My duties here are demanding but not burdensome, and my employer has proven both generous and respectful." Father Dimitriu stepped forward, his aged eyes sharp with concern. "And this employer of yours, where is he? We would speak with him directly to ensure proper arrangements have been made for your care and protection." "Lord Alexandru keeps irregular hours, Father. He is often away on business matters and values his privacy highly. I assure you, he has treated me with complete propriety." The blacksmith, Petru, shifted restlessly behind the 2 older men. "There are stories about this place, woman. Dark tales passed down through generations. No good Christian should dwell here willingly. Stories spread by superstition and ignorance," Marta responded firmly. "I have found nothing here but a man troubled by loneliness and loss, much as I was troubled when you first approached me with this opportunity." As she spoke, Marta became aware of a presence in the shadows above Alexandru, listening from the gallery that overlooked the entrance hall. She could feel his tension like electricity in the air, though the visitors seemed oblivious to his proximity. Around her neck, she fingered the bloodstone amulet that Alexandru had quietly left on her nightstand 3 days prior. He had offered no explanation for the gift, but she had noticed how its deep red surface seemed to grow warmer in his presence. Elder Vasily studied her face intently. "You speak as one who has made her choice freely. Yet we would be poor shepherds of our flock if we did not ensure no coercion influences your decision. I understand your concern, but I assure you it is misplaced. I came here seeking honest work and fair payment. I have found both, along with something I had not dared hope for, purpose and peace." Marta's voice carried quiet conviction. "My husband and son are dead, Elder. My farm was lost to debt. What life awaited me in the village but charity and pity? Here, I am valued for my skills and treated with dignity." Father Dimitriu crossed himself and spoke in a voice heavy with ancient knowledge. "Child, There are forces in these mountains that prey upon the lonely and desperate. Evil often wears a mask of kindness to ensnare unwary souls. Then you should be pleased to know that my soul remains entirely my own, Marta replied with a slight smile. I attend my prayers each morning and evening. I read from my husband's prayer book, and I find God's presence as readily within these walls as I ever did in the village chapel. As if to underscore her point, she drew forth the wooden cross her son had carved, letting it catch the torchlight. The three men relaxed slightly at this display of faith, though their eyes continued to probe the shadows of the hall. We have heard strange tales, Petru said gruffly. Lights moving through the castle at all hours, sounds of weeping in the wind. Some claim to have seen a pale figure walking the battlements under the full moon. Old castles make many sounds, especially when winter winds blow through ancient stones, Marta explained patiently. As for lights, I move through the halls each evening to tend the fires and ensure the rooms remain warm. Perhaps that accounts for what curious observers have seen. Elder Vasily stepped closer, lowering his voice. Marta, if there is anything at all that troubles you about your situation here, you need only speak the word. We have horses waiting, and you could be safely back in the village within 2 hours. For a moment, Marta felt the weight of choice pressing upon her shoulders. These men offered her a return to familiarity, to a world where she understood all the rules and faced only ordinary hardships. Behind her, in the shadows above, waited a man who challenged everything she thought she knew about good and evil, life and death, love and redemption. Yet when she spoke, her voice was steady and sure. I thank you for your concern. Truly, it speaks well of our village that you would ride through a winter night to ensure my safety. But I ask you to trust my judgment in this matter. I am not a foolish girl, susceptible to pretty words and false promises. I am a woman of 40 years who has buried husband and child and learned to recognize genuine kindness when it appears. The three men exchanged glances, clearly disappointed by her response but unable to argue with her reasoned explanation. Father Dimitriou sighed deeply and made the sign of the cross in her direction. Then we can only pray that God watches over you, child. And we ask that you send word to the village regularly, so that we may know of your continued welfare. I will do so gladly, Marta agreed. Perhaps I might send letters with any merchants who travel this way, or with Lord Alexandru when his business takes him toward the village. As the three men prepared to depart, Elder Vasily paused at the threshold. One final question, Marta. In your time here, have you ever felt... He struggled for words. Have you experienced anything that defies natural explanation? Anything that might suggest supernatural influences? Marta considered the question carefully, thinking of Alexandru's pale beauty, his inhuman grace, the way he moved without sound and appeared without warning. She thought of the music box that played melodies composed centuries ago, of the impossible warmth she had felt beneath his cold skin, of dreams filled with memories that belonged to another woman in another time. I have experienced many things that exceed my understanding, she said finally. But then, is that not true for all of us? Do we fully comprehend the mystery of sunrise, or the miracle of love, or the wonder of forgiveness? Some mysteries are meant to be lived rather than explained. After the villagers departed, Alexandru emerged from the shadows like morning mist taking human form. His face showed gratitude mixed with amazement, as though he could scarcely believe what he had witnessed. You defended me, he said quietly. Not just my actions, but my very nature. You spoke of me as though I were worthy of such loyalty. Because you are, Marta replied simply. And perhaps it is time you began to believe that yourself. In the weeks following the village delegation's visit, a restless energy seemed to permeate the castle's ancient stones. Alexandru had begun venturing into rooms that had remained sealed for decades, as though Marta's presence had awakened not just his humanity, but his curiosity about his own forgotten history. It was during one of these explorations that they made a discovery that would shatter everything they believed about their connection. They had been working together to restore the castle's library, a vast chamber lined floor to ceiling with volumes in dozens of languages. Most bore the familiar patina of age, but some seemed impossibly well preserved, their leather bindings supple and their pages crisp as though bound yesterday. Alexandru moved through the stacks with reverent care, identifying works by touch alone. "This section contains the family records," he explained, indicating a collection of bound ledgers near the chamber's eastern wall. "Birth records, marriage contracts, land deeds, the bureaucratic skeleton upon which noble houses build their histories." Marta was drawn to a particular volume whose leather cover bore the carved image of a tree with extensive roots and branches. When she opened it, she found herself looking at carefully illuminated family genealogies, each entry recorded in the flowing script of medieval scribes. Names and dates stretched back centuries, documenting marriages, births, deaths, and the complex web of relationships that bound noble families together. "How beautiful," she murmured, tracing one particularly elaborate entry with her finger. "Your family took great care to preserve their heritage." Elena insisted on maintaining the records, Alexandru said softly, joining her at the reading table. "She believed that understanding our past was essential to building our future. She spent countless hours in this very chair, updating entries and researching connections to other noble houses." As he spoke, Marta noticed that her finger had come to rest on an entry dated 1447, the year of Alexandru's transformation. The page documented his engagement to Elena Vasile and listed her parentage in meticulous detail. What caught Marta's attention, however, was a notation in the margin, written in different ink and what appeared to be a more recent hand. "Alexandru," she said slowly, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "Look at this margin note. It appears to have been added long after the original entry." He leaned closer, squinting at the faded writing. As he read, his face went completely white, paler even than his usual supernatural pallor. His hands began to tremble, and he gripped the edge of the table as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. "What does it say?" Marta asked, alarmed by his reaction. "It says," his voice broke. He cleared his throat and tried again. "It says that Elena died carrying my child, a daughter, born 3 months after her mother's death, who somehow survived. The child was taken to the village and raised by Elena's sister." The implications hit Marta like a physical blow. If Elena had borne Alexandru's child, if that child had lived and had children of her own, then somewhere in the village bloodlines ran the genetic legacy of both the woman Alexandru had loved and the man he had been before his transformation. With growing urgency, they turned through more pages, following the genealogical trail through subsequent generations. Elena's sister, Maria Vasile, had indeed raised a child named Ileana, a child with no recorded father, but bearing a striking resemblance to Elena, according to detailed physical descriptions maintained in the church records. "Here," Alexandru whispered, his finger stopping on an entry from 50 years later. "Ileana married a merchant named Constantin Bogdan. They had 3 sons and a daughter. They continued following the family line forward through the centuries, through plague, years and wars, through marriages and migrations that scattered the descendants across the Carpathian region. The trail led through the Bogdan family, then the Popescu line, then the Stănescu branch, each generation carrying forward genetic echoes of Elena's beauty and Alexandru's dark eyes. And finally, inevitably, the trail led to an entry dated just 43 years ago. Ileana Stănescu, married to Gheorghe Ivanov, blacksmith of Brasov. One daughter, Marta Ivanov, born October 15, 1804. The family Bible fell from Marta's nerveless fingers and struck the stone floor with a sound like thunder in the sudden silence. She stared at Alexandru, who stared back at her, both of them grappling with the magnitude of what they had discovered. "I am not a reincarnation of Elena," Marta whispered. "I am her descendant. Her bloodline has survived through 5 centuries, and it has led me back to you." Alexandru's face cycled through a dozen emotions: shock, grief, wonder, and something that might have been terror. "The child Elena carried when she died. My child. You are. Your blood runs in my veins," Marta finished, her own voice barely audible. "Diluted by centuries and generations, but present nonetheless. That is why you recognize something in me. That is why your curse responds to my presence." "Dear God in heaven," Alexandru breathed, sinking into the chair Elena had once occupied. "What have I done? What manner of cosmic cruelty is this? What do you mean? Do you not see? For 400 years, Elena's descendants have lived under the shadow of my curse. Every generation has carried the burden of genetic memory, the dreams, the visions, the inexplicable longing for something they could not name. Your ancestors suffered because of what I chose, because of the bargain I made in my grief and desperation." Marta felt the weight of revelation settling over her like a heavy cloak. Suddenly, so many things made sense: the vivid dreams she had experienced since childhood, dreams of a grand castle and a dark-eyed nobleman who spoke of love and loss. The inexplicable sense of familiarity she had felt upon first seeing Alexandru, the way her touch seemed to warm his cold skin and kindle, something resembling life in his undead form. "My grandmother used to speak of strange dreams," she said slowly. "Visions of a castle in the mountains, of a man who waited for someone who would never come. I thought they were merely the fantasies of an aging mind." "Genetic memory," Alexandru said miserably. "The bloodline, remembering what the individual consciousness has forgotten. Elena's descendants have been haunted by my existence for centuries, drawn inexorably toward a destiny they could not escape." "Or perhaps," Marta said with growing understanding, "my family line was preserved precisely for this moment. Perhaps Elena's death and the survival of your child were not tragedies, but necessary elements in a larger design. Perhaps I was always meant to find my way here, to help you find redemption and finally break the curse that has bound both our bloodlines." Alexandru stared at her with an expression that blended hope and horror in equal measure. "You would willingly accept such a burden? Knowing that your very existence has been shaped by my sin? "I would accept the opportunity to heal what was broken," Marta replied firmly. "I would embrace the chance to transform centuries of suffering into something meaningful and redemptive. If my bloodline has been preserved to serve this purpose, then I choose to serve it gladly. But the cost, if we fail, if the curse cannot be broken, then your life will have been forfeit for nothing. You could leave now, return to the village, live whatever years remain to you, free from this burden." "Free to what? Grow old alone, wondering always what might have been possible. Wonder what purpose my dreams and visions were meant to serve." Marta shook her head decisively. "No, Alexandru, I have found my purpose at last. I understand now why I survived when my husband and son did not, why I was brought to this place at this time. I am here to complete what Elena began, to save the man she loved and free both our bloodlines from the curse that has bound us together across the centuries." In the growing darkness of the library, surrounded by the weight of history and the promise of redemption, two souls, separated by death and time, recognized at last the true scope of their connection and the magnitude of the task that lay before them. The days following their earth-shattering discovery passed in a whirlwind of research and preparation. Alexandru threw himself into the ancient texts with desperate intensity, searching for any reference to curses that might be broken through bloodline connections. Marta proved invaluable in this quest. Her ability to read Latin and her practical understanding of folk remedies, providing insights that his centuries of scholarly pursuit had missed. They worked primarily in the castle's highest tower, a chamber that Alexandru had avoided for decades, but which contained the most comprehensive collection of mystical texts. Here, surrounded by grimoires bound in strange materials and scrolls written in languages that predated Christ, they sought the key to Alexandru's redemption. Here, Marta said one evening, her finger tracing a passage in a tome written by a medieval alchemist. Listen to this. When the blood of the cursed mingles with the blood of the innocent, when love conquers the grave's dominion, when willing sacrifice meets perfect faith, then may the darkness be driven out and the light restored. Alexandru looked up from the ceremonial dagger he had been examining, an ornate blade inscribed with symbols from a dozen different mystical traditions. The weapon had belonged to the witch who had cursed him, retrieved from her lair after her death decades later. According to the texts, it would be essential for any ritual designed to reverse her work. The blood of the cursed, he repeated thoughtfully. That would be mine. The blood of the innocent would be mine, Marta finished. Elena's bloodline, untainted by supernatural corruption, despite carrying the genetic memory of your curse. But the willing sacrifice, what manner of sacrifice could break a curse this powerful, and at what cost? They had found references to similar rituals in 3 different sources, each describing a process that required the cursed individual to surrender their supernatural nature entirely. The text spoke of transformation so complete that it amounted to a form of death and rebirth. The vampire would either emerge fully human or be destroyed completely in the attempt. The risk is mine to take, Alexandru said when Marta voiced her concerns. If the ritual fails, I will simply cease to exist. You, however, would face no danger provided you withdraw before the final phase. Absolutely not. Marta's voice carried the steel of absolute determination. The ritual requires the presence of the innocent bloodline throughout the entire process. If I withdraw, the connection is broken and the transformation becomes impossible. Then we will not attempt it. I will not risk your life for the mere possibility of reclaiming my humanity. And I will not stand by while you condemn yourself to eternal torment when redemption lies within our grasp. Marta set down the oak, ancient text, and moved to stand before him. Alexandru, look at me. Do you see a helpless woman who needs protection? Or do you see Elena's descendant, bred through 20 generations to be strong enough for this moment? In the candlelight, Alexandru could indeed see Elena's strength reflected in Marta's determined features. The resemblance went deeper than mere physical similarity. It was a kinship of spirit, a shared courage that had enabled Elena to nurse plague victims and now enabled Marta to face supernatural forces without flinching. I see both, he admitted, and that is precisely why I cannot bear the thought of losing you as I lost her. You will not lose me, Marta said firmly, but neither will you protect me by condemning us both to half-lives. Either we face this challenge together, or we remain forever bound by the same curse that has haunted my family for centuries. Their debate was interrupted by a sound that made Alexandru's blood run cold, the baying of hounds in the distance, accompanied by the thunder of many horses approaching the castle at speed. He moved to the tower window and peered down at a sight that filled him with dread. Torches flickered like fallen stars across the valley below as a large group of armed men made their way up the mountain path toward Castle Dracul. Even at this distance, Alexandru could see the gleam of silver weapons and the dark shapes of crosses held high against the night sky. The village has organized a hunting party, he said grimly. Someone has convinced them that you are in mortal danger, and they come prepared for war against a supernatural enemy. Marta joined him at the window, her face growing pale as she counted the approaching Riders, there must be 50 men down there, half the able-bodied men in the valley. They will not be turned back by gentle words this time. They come seeking my destruction, and they will not leave until they have achieved it or died in the attempt. Alexandru moved quickly to a wooden chest in the corner of the chamber, withdrawing items that gleamed with mystical significance in the candlelight. A silver chalice inscribed with protective runes. Vials of blessed water obtained from 7 different holy sites. Herbs gathered under specific moon phases and preserved for centuries. All the components necessary for the ritual they had been planning. "How long do we have?" Marta asked, her practical mind already shifting into preparation mode. "Perhaps 2 hours before they reach the castle gates. Another hour to breach the defenses, if they are truly determined." Alexandru's hands moved with practiced efficiency as he arranged the ritual components on the chamber's central table. "If we are going to attempt this, it must be tonight. Are we ready? Is the ritual preparation complete?" Alexandru met her eyes across the candlelit chamber. "As ready as centuries of research and weeks of preparation can make us. But Marta, you must understand, once we begin, there can be no turning back. The process, once initiated, must be completed regardless of the consequences." "I understand." Marta began helping him arrange the mystical components according to the precise pattern described in the ancient texts. "And I accept whatever outcome awaits us." As they worked, the sound of approaching voices grew louder. Alexandru's supernatural hearing could distinguish individual speakers among the mob below. Elder Vasile's voice raised in prayers for protection, Father Dimitriu reciting Latin exorcisms, the blacksmith Petru bellowing orders for the men to maintain formation. "They carry holy water and silver weapons," Alexandru reported as he lit candles at specific points. "Around the ritual circle. They have prepared for battle against a creature they believe to be purely evil." "Then we must prove them wrong," Marta said, placing the ceremonial dagger at the circle's center. "We must show them that redemption is possible, even for the seemingly damned." The blessed chalice caught the candlelight as Alexandru filled it with holy water from 7 sacred springs. The liquid seemed to glow with inner radiance, as though anticipating the purpose for which it would be used. Around them, the ancient stones of the tower seemed to thrum with energy, as though the castle itself sensed that centuries of waiting were about to reach their culmination. "Marta," Alexandru said softly, as the final preparations neared completion, "before we begin, there is something I must tell you, something I have realized only since learning of our true connection." She looked up from the herbs she was scattering in the prescribed pattern. "What is it?" "I love you." The words came quietly, but with absolute certainty. Not as a replacement for Elena, not as an echo of what I once felt, but as yourself. As the woman who saw worth in a creature that had forgotten its own humanity. As the descendant of my beloved, who chose to complete what she began. I love you with whatever remains of my soul, and I needed you to know that before we transform that love into the force that breaks your curse." Marta finished, her eyes bright with tears and determination in equal measure. "I love you as well, Alexandru. I love the man you were, the creature you became, and the human you will be again. That love will be our strength in the trial ahead." The sound of armed men pounding on the castle's great doors echoed through the stone corridors below. Time had run out for preparation and doubt. The moment of transformation or destruction had arrived. Alexandru took Marta's hands in his own, marveling one last time at the warmth that flowed between them. "Ah, you ready, my beloved descendant? Are you prepared to help me reclaim my humanity, or die in the attempt?" "I am ready," Marta replied with quiet conviction. "Let us end this curse once and for all, and face whatever dawn awaits us together." With the mob's torches visible through every window and their angry voices echoing off the castle walls, Alexandru and Marta began the ritual that would either restore his mortality or destroy them both in the fires of ancient magic. The ritual began with Alexandru taking the ceremonial dagger in trembling hands, its ancient blade catching the candlelight like captured starfire. Around them, the tower chamber filled with an energy that seemed to press against the stone walls themselves, as though the very foundations of the castle were holding their breath in anticipation. "The blood of the cursed," Alexandru whispered, following the incantation they had memorized from the ancient texts. He drew the blade across his palm, and where it cut, his toup's blood flowed, not red but dark as midnight, carrying within it the stain of 4 centuries of supernatural existence. His blood dripped into the blessed chalice with a sound like distant thunder. The holy water began to glow with an otherworldly light, steam rising from its surface as the opposing forces of sacred and profane met and struggled for dominance. "The blood of the innocent," Marta said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. She took the dagger from Alexandru's hands and made the same cut across her palm. Her blood was crimson as morning roses, carrying within it the genetic legacy of Elena's love and the accumulated strength of 20 generations. When her blood joined his in the chalice, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Light erupted from the vessel, not the gentle glow of candles, but the brilliant radiance of dawn breaking over mountain peaks. The very air in the chamber seemed to sing with harmonies that had not been heard since the moment of creation. Alexandru cried out as the transformation began, his supernatural nature fighting against the ritual's power with desperate violence. His pale skin flushed with color, only to drain white again. His inhuman features shifted and blurred, as though his very essence was being rewritten by forces beyond mortal comprehension. "Hold fast," Marta commanded, grasping his free hand with both of hers. "Whatever comes, do not let go. The connection between us must not be broken." Through the tower windows, they could see torches approaching the castle's main entrance. The mob had reached the gates, and were even now testing the ancient iron bars that had protected Castle Dracul for centuries. Voices raised in prayer and threat echoed off the stone walls, growing louder with each passing moment. The chalice in Alexandru's grip began to burn with cold fire, the blessed water boiling away to reveal something that was neither blood nor water, but pure essence distilled from love and sacrifice. He raised it to his lips as the text demanded, though every instinct screamed against consuming the mixture that might heal or destroy him. As the liquid touched his tongue, Alexandru's entire being convulsed with agony so profound that his scream shattered every piece of glass in the tower chamber. The supernatural strength that had sustained him for centuries began to ebb away like water from a broken vessel, leaving him feeling hollow and empty, yet somehow more real than he had been since his transformation. Marta felt the change through their joined hands, his skin warming to human temperature, his pulse beginning to beat with mortal rhythm, his breath coming in sharp gasps as his lungs remembered their forgotten purpose. The curse was breaking, but the process threatened to tear him apart in the transformation. "Look at me," she commanded as his eyes rolled back and his body began to convulse. "Alexandru, look at me. Remember who you are beneath the curse. Remember Elena's love. Remember your own music. Remember what it means to be human." His eyes found hers through the supernatural storm raging around them, and in them she saw not the cold depths of an inhuman predator, but the warm brown gaze of a mortal man struggling to be reborn. His reflection had returned to the polished surfaces around the chamber, and for the first time in centuries he cast a shadow in the candlelight. The transformation reached its crescendo just as the sound of splintering wood echoed from the castle's main entrance. The mob had breached the gates and was pouring into the great hall below, their torches and silver weapons gleaming with righteous fury. "They're coming," Marta warned, though she did not release Alexandru's hand even as heavy footsteps thundered up the tower stairs. "The ritual," Alexandru gasped through the pain of transformation. "It's not complete. If they interrupt now—" "They won't," Marta said with fierce determination. could hear Elder Vasile's voice booming prayers up the stairwell, Father Demetriu's Latin exorcisms growing louder with each step they climbed. "Whatever happens, I will not let them stop this. You will be free, Alexandru. I swear it on Elena's memory." The chamber door burst open just as the golden wedding ring on Alexandru's finger, Elena's ring that he had worn in secret for 4 centuries, began to shine with warm, living light. The mob of armed villagers poured into the room, silver crosses raised and holy water ready, expecting to find a monster threatening an innocent woman. Instead, they found 2 people kneeling together in the midst of what could only be described as a miracle in progress, surrounded by light that spoke not of darkness, but of redemption itself. Elder Vasily stood frozen in the doorway, his silver cross raised high, as the impossible scene before him challenged everything he thought he understood about good and evil. The chamber blazed with light that seemed to emanate from Alexandru himself, yet it was not the cold radiance of supernatural power, but the warm glow of something sacred and transformative. "Stand away from him, Marta," Father Demetriu commanded, pushing past the elder with a vial of holy water clutched in his trembling hands. "Can you not see the evil that surrounds you?" "I see redemption in progress," Marta replied firmly, never releasing Alexandru's hand, despite the way it trembled with the ongoing transformation. "I see a curse being broken through love and sacrifice, exactly as our Lord intended such things to be healed." The blacksmith Petru raised his silver sword, its blessed blade gleaming in the supernatural light. "That creature has bewitched you, woman. No good can come from consorting with the undead." "Then explain this," Marta challenged, gesturing to Alexandru's transformed appearance. Where moments before he had possessed the pale, inhuman beauty of a vampire, now his skin flushed with mortal color. His breathing came in labored gasps, and sweat beaded on his brow as his body remembered what it meant to be human. Father Demetriu stepped closer, his trained eye taking in details that the others missed. Alexandru's reflection was clearly visible in the polished surfaces around the chamber. He cast shadows in the candlelight. Most remarkably, the holy water that had spilled from the chalice during the transformation lay pooled around him without causing any harm. "Impossible," the priest whispered, lowering his vial with shaking hands. "The unholy cannot abide the touch of blessed water, yet he kneels within it as though he is no longer unholy," Marta finished. "As though the curse that bound him for centuries has been broken through the power of love and faith working together." Alexandru struggled to speak through the final stages of his transformation, his voice hoarse but unmistakably human. "Father, I know you have cause to fear me. For 4 centuries I have been a creature of darkness, sustained by blood, cursed to walk apart from God's creation. But I swear to you by all that is sacred, I seek only redemption and the chance to make amends for the evil I have done." The golden wedding ring on his finger blazed brighter, its warm light filling the chamber with a radiance that spoke of love transcending death itself. Elder Vasile found himself lowering his cross as understanding dawned in his weathered features. "You are the lord of this castle," he said slowly. "The nobleman our ancestors spoke of in whispers. But you are not, as the legends described." "The legends spoke truth about what I was," Alexandru replied, rising slowly to his feet with Marta's steadying hand supporting him. "But they could not foretell what I might become through the grace of God and the love of a woman pure enough to see beyond the monster to the man trapped within." Father Demetriu stepped forward cautiously, his theological training warring with the evidence before his eyes. "If what you claim is true, if this transformation is genuine, then you must prove it. Submit to the test of faith that no creature of darkness can endure." Without hesitation, Alexandru knelt before the priest and bowed his head. "Test me, Father. Let me prove that I am no longer the enemy of all that is holy." The priest raised his silver cross and pressed it against Alexandru's forehead. Instead of the burning and recoiling that folklore promised, the metal simply rested against his skin like any ordinary ornament. Father Demetriou then sprinkled holy water over Alexandru's bowed head, and where it touched, there was no steam or sizzling, but merely the gentle blessing of sanctified water upon a penitent soul. "Merciful God," the priest breathed, staggering backward in amazement. "It is true. The curse has been broken." The assembled villagers murmured among themselves, their weapons lowering as they witnessed what could only be described as a miracle. These were simple people, raised on stories of eternal damnation and supernatural evil, yet they possessed the wisdom to recognize genuine redemption when it stood before them. "How is this possible?" Elder Vasile asked, his voice filled with wonder rather than fear. Marta stepped forward, her hand still linked with Alexandru's, their joined blood still staining the blessed chalice that had served as the vessel for their transformation. "Love, Elder, love that transcends death. Love that sees worth in the seemingly worthless. Love that believes redemption is possible for any soul that truly seeks it. And sacrifice," Alexandru added, his voice growing stronger as his mortality solidified. "The sacrifice of a woman brave enough to risk everything for a creature she barely knew, simply because she believed he deserved the chance to find his way back to grace." As dawn broke over the Carpathian mountains, its golden light streaming through the tower windows, to mingle with the supernatural radiance that still surrounded them, Alexandru Dracul knelt among his former enemies as a man reborn, free at last from the curse that had bound him to darkness for 4 centuries. 6 months after that transformative dawn, Castle Dracul stood restored to a glory it had not known for centuries. The crumbling battlements had been repaired, the overgrown gardens replanted, and the dark halls once again rang with the sounds of life and laughter. What had once been a monument to isolation and despair had become a beacon of hope for all who witnessed the miracle of redemption made manifest. The transformation extended far beyond mere physical restoration. Alexandru Dracul, once cursed to eternal night, now rose each morning with the sun, his mortality as complete as his redemption. He had aged visibly in the months since his transformation, gaining the lines and weathering that marked a man approaching his 40th year rather than the ageless perfection of his supernatural state. Yet these signs of humanity were treasures beyond price, each wrinkle and grey hair a testament to his return to the natural order of creation. The village that had once whispered his name in terror now spoke it with respect and gratitude. Alexandru had used his centuries of accumulated knowledge to improve their lives in countless ways, introducing new farming techniques that increased crop yields, sharing medical knowledge that reduced infant mortality, and opening his restored library to any who wished to learn. The transformation had indeed broken more than his personal curse. It had healed the ancient rift between the castle and the community it was meant to serve. On a warm spring morning, as apple blossoms painted the valleys white and the Carpathian peaks gleamed with the last of winter's snow, Marta stood before the mirror in what had once been Elena's chamber, adjusting the simple but elegant wedding dress that village women had sewn for her, with loving care. The new family portrait commissioned for the occasion sat propped on the dressing table, showing herself and Alexandru together in the castle's restored garden, their faces reflecting the peace that had settled over their lives like a blessing. "You look radiant, my dear," said Anna, the village seamstress who had become Marta's closest friend among the local women. "Master Alexandru will be speechless when he sees you walking down that aisle." "I hope not speechless," Marta replied, with a gentle laugh, touching the silver locket at her throat, the same locket Alexandru had carried for centuries, now holding a miniature portrait of them both. "I have grown quite fond of our conversations, and I would miss them terribly if he suddenly lost the power of speech." Through the chamber window came the sound of music, violins and flutes, playing the wedding march Alexandru had composed for this day. It was a melody born of joy rather than loss, celebrating new beginnings, rather than mourning what was past. The notes danced on the spring air like butterflies, carrying with them the promise of hope fulfilled and love rewarded. In the chapel that had been built in the castle's courtyard, Father Dimitriou waited to perform the ceremony that would unite two souls who had already been joined by trials no ordinary couple could imagine enduring. The priest had become a regular visitor to the castle, drawn not only by Alexandru's remarkable story, but by the theological implications of a redemption so complete that it challenged traditional understanding of damnation and salvation. The assembled guests represented a community transformed by witnessing the impossible made real. Elder Vasily sat in the front row, his ancient eyes bright with joy as he prepared to see the widow he had helped find employment become a bride blessed by God's grace. Petru, the blacksmith, who had once raised silver weapons against Alexandru, now counted himself among the nobleman's closest friends and advisers. Villagers who had lived their entire lives in fear of the castle's dark lord now brought their children to play in its gardens and their troubles to its lord for wise counsel. As Marta walked down the aisle created between two rows of wooden chairs, her eyes found Alexandru's across the flower-strewn courtyard. He stood beside the altar in clothing befitting a nobleman of his station, yet the finery could not compare to the radiance that seemed to emanate from his very being. This was not the cold beauty of his supernatural state, but the warm attractiveness of a man who had found peace with himself and his place in creation. When Father Dimitriou spoke the ancient words that would bind them as husband and wife, the ceremony felt less like a beginning than a confirmation of bonds that had been forged in supernatural fire and tempered by trials that would have destroyed lesser love. Their vows were simple but profound, acknowledging not only their commitment to each other, but their shared dedication to the work of healing and restoration that had brought them together. Do you, Alexandru Dracul, take this woman to be your wife, to love and cherish her as long as you both shall live? I do, Alexandru replied, his voice carrying the certainty of a man who had learned the true value of love through losing it and finding it again. I pledge to her not only my heart, but my humanity, which she helped me reclaim. I promise to spend whatever years God grants me, proving worthy of the grace she has shown me. And do you, Marta Ivanov, take this man to be your husband, to stand by his side through whatever trials may come? I do, Marta answered, her words ringing clear as cathedral bells. I choose him freely, as I have chosen him from the moment I understood that love sees not what was or what might have been, but what is and what can be through faith and dedication. As the sun reached its zenith above the restored castle, Alexandru and Marta shared their first kiss as husband and wife, surrounded by a community that had learned to believe in miracles. The curse that had bound one bloodline to darkness for centuries was finally completely broken, replaced by a blessing that would extend to generations yet unborn.